how do we collaborate beyond the Congress? Or what do we have in place that we can tap into? So when we look at a community of practice, perhaps in this room we could call ourselves a community of practice. Or do we share a common concern? Do we have a set of problems or interests that makes us come together as individuals? Most times communities of practice focus on sharing best practices and also creating knowledge. And as we look in the way that we work these days, we see that there's a paradigm shift in the way groups of people are interacting, with a shift towards creating networks, partners, and collaborations. And so, under what context should we be collaborating? We could, for instance, look at the history of our relationships. What has been the history of our relationships? Here in this room, when we look at ourselves and look at the different groups in this room, how have we been relating to be able to create a network or to collaborate or to come together as a partner? We would also look at the relative power of the members. Which members have more power, and which members who are not in the group also have power? And when we are looking at collaboration, we'd also be thinking of the extent of the political and cultural control. Because when groups meet, for example, in different countries, we have different maybe rules or laws that govern our meeting. For example, where I come from, we have some rules. You don't just meet as a group. There is the Public Order Management Bill. You have to inform the police if you're going to meet. So when we are collaborating, are we going to meet in face-to-face meetings? Do we have to inform the police before we meet? Or are we going to have informal gatherings? So we need to have all those policy background when we are doing these collaborations. Then the other issue is to look at the complexity of the issues being addressed. What kind of issues are we addressing in the communities of practice that we want to be forming? And the cultures and the age of the network. So in forming these communities of practice, we look at 4 essential components, and these are: how do members participate in these partnerships, collaborations, or the communities of practice, and how do we nurture the network that we are forming? Do we have champions within us that are going to be able to move this practice forward? Do we need support, or do we have support within ourselves? Or do we need executive support from outside? So the 3 main things to be looking at here are: what type of community do we want? What type of domain do we want to be practicing under? And what kind of practice do we want under this networking? And we have stages of development when we are forming these collaborations. For example, in this room, there's a lot of potential in starting to be able to create a practice. When you look around, you see people with familiar faces, with familiar situations, as the discussions have been in the previous sessions. Then you start finding each other and discovering what's common. So do we see a potential in this room that we can be able to take forward after the Congress? And then you go to the second stage of coercing. How do I coerce the person whom I see has a potential here that is going to benefit me and benefit them? Then we explore the connectedness. Do we have a connection? Do I connect with this person, for example? And then how active am I going to be if I connect with this person? Then at the stage of activeness, this is also the stage where you might disperse when you see that your goal is not being addressed in this networking or the partnership that you've created. And we go on to the last stage where it's just a memory that, yeah, once I thought of connecting with this person, but it didn't work out, and the collaboration phases out. So within the African Conservation Tillage Network, we've started making initial efforts at establishing partnerships and communities of practice. And we have 5 categories that we've been thinking about or trying to establish. We have the academia research community of practice, which is comprised of colleges, universities, and research organizations. And right now, at this stage of the research community of practice, is just at a database stage. And then we have the CA equipment manufacturers, suppliers, and service providers community of practice, which is comprised of CA equipment manufacturers, repair workshops, and financial institutions. In November last year, we convened a meeting where we had a group of equipment suppliers come together in a face-to-face. And that's where we set the initial stage of how do we collaborate as CA equipment manufacturers. So at this stage, we only have a database of the different categories of CA equipment manufacturers in the different regions. So we are trying to see how do we move forward and how do we get collaboration in this community of practice. The other communities of practice that we are still looking at and going to initiate are the farmer and farmer organizations. And we will be linking, of course, with already the established farmer organizations that exist in the different countries to be able to enrich what is already existing. And this will be comprised of individuals, smallholder, large-scale farmers, CBOs, farmer organizations, and farmer cooperatives. The other community of practice is on women and youth in agriculture. How do we get the different women practicing agriculture at the community level to collaborate? And how do they tap into the research, for example, community of practice? How do they tap into the academia where research is being done and it's not getting down to the grassroots? And the last category is on developers and disseminators of CA. So this idea of networks and partnerships is not new. It was also floated during the Third World Congress that was held in Nairobi in 2005, where we saw one of the objectives was to offer knowledge and information to guide informed decision on how to increase the extent of CA adoption among stakeholders. Even as we have this first Congress, we are still talking of networking and partnerships. So what has gone wrong? Or are there already partnerships that are existing that people do not know about but need to engage into? Also during that Congress, one of the thematic discussions was on integrating CA in a holistic manner in the farming systems. And how was the strategy being proposed to do this? The strategy proposed in 2005 was that there was a need to create platforms for sharing and learning experiences among the various stakeholders and to forge synergies and not to compete among the various agencies. And also we looked at that time, looking at the value chain. Still the strategy was to create partnerships that promote value chain, value addition through the processing and transformation in the farming communication. Because when we look at ourselves, where does the knowledge or the information that we generate, where does it stop? Does it get down to the end user? Is it in the appropriate context? Is it in the appropriate language? Because there are all those issues that we need to be addressing. So going forward, we started with the CA equipment manufacturers workshop, and they took a bold step to create this community of practice. We had a face-to-face workshop, and during that face-to-face workshop, we got volunteers, dynamic young people that can move this process forward. And now the next stage that we are going to is which platform do we share? Because people come from different regions. How are we going to get the synergies together in the different regions? And what's going to be the modality of sharing within these regions? And how does it feed back into the larger platform? And the last one is on the operationalization of the community of practice. How will it operate? So as we convene these forums and as we move forward, are we going to be networking in meetings only? And how do we embrace other platforms to be able to share what we already have? The ball is in our courts. We can either move this process forward or stay in business as usual. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Bonjour.
Moi, c'est Minata Koulibaly. Je travaille dans un réseau au Burkina Faso qui s'appelle Interréseau. Je ne vais pas trop revenir sur le contexte. Actuellement, 2014 est déclaré année internationale de l'agriculture familiale et de la sécurité alimentaire. Donc, cette année aussi, il y a de nombreux défis qui se posent au niveau de l'agriculture. Nous avons évoqué depuis hier jusqu'à aujourd'hui la question des changements climatiques. On a évoqué la croissance démographique, et la pression sur les ressources naturelles et le coût élevé des intrants agricoles. La question se pose comment travailler ensemble pour élever le défi d'une agriculture durable. Donc Jeannette a tantôt parlé du réseautage, de l'intérêt de se mettre en réseau, c'est faciliter le partage et l'accès à l'information, c'est la mise en réseau des idées, c'est la valorisation des réflexions et des expériences. Aussi, la collaboration, ça donne une plus-value, ça essaie d'élargir le public cible. Quand on collabore ensemble, on a plus de moyens humains et financiers. En fait, ma présentation va beaucoup se axer sur ce que fait Interréseau et l'exemple de réseautage que nous avons. Interréseau, c'est une organisation qui fédère des organisations au niveau de l'Afrique subsaharienne et des organisations au niveau du Nord. Donc, vous avez le site Internet. L'objectif, c'est de créer des conditions de partage d'informations pour tous les acteurs qui sont engagés dans le domaine du développement agricole et rural. Donc, le réseau a pour objectif de travailler en faveur des populations rurales et le développement de l'agriculture basée sur l'exploitation familiale. Donc, tous ceux qui sont dans Interréseau partagent les mêmes objectifs que le réseau. Donc, pour pouvoir travailler ensemble, pour pouvoir être dans un réseau, il faut établir des outils de collaboration. Et ces outils permettent d'établir et de maintenir les échanges, d'entretenir la dynamique de groupe. À cet effet, il y a des outils collaboratifs, des outils classiques comme le support papier et les nouveaux outils comme les réseaux sociaux qui peuvent être utilisés par les membres. Au niveau d'Interréseau, quels sont les outils collaboratifs qu'on a mis en place? Il y a un bulletin de veille qui est hebdomadaire. Ce bulletin a plus de 6000 abonnés et je pense que c'est essentiellement des francophones. Il y a des outils d'échange, c'est-à-dire il y a des réunions de travail que le réseau met en place avec les différents acteurs qui sont intéressés pour le développement rural et la promotion de l'exploitation familiale. Le réseau aussi dispose de supports de diffusion, de sites web et d'un bulletin semestriel. Au niveau du réseau, on a créé ce qu'on appelle des groupes de travail thématiques. Donc, dans chaque groupe de travail thématique, il y a des acteurs qui sont intéressés, qui viennent échanger, et selon les périodicités fixées par les acteurs eux-mêmes. Si on prend le groupe sur le conseil à l'exploitation familiale, la représentation régionale de ACT au Burkina est membre de ce groupe, et on échange souvent sur comment faire du bon conseil à l'exploitation familiale, comment capitaliser tout ce qui se fait au niveau du conseil à l'exploitation familiale. Il y a aussi un groupe qui est axé sur le financement de l'agriculture, et un autre groupe qui est sur les politiques agricoles, d'autres sur les organisations paysannes. Donc, il y a essentiellement des groupes de travail thématiques qui permettent de mener la réflexion. Donc, à ce niveau aussi, Interréseau utilise beaucoup le potentiel d'éthique. Donc, dans chaque groupe de travail, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, ça peut être les ONG, les organisations paysannes, les partenaires, le secteur privé, les décideurs. Ils participent, ils échangent, ils produisent des informations qui sont partagées et publiées sur les différents supports de communication du réseau. Donc, pour être en phase avec la réalité, le réseau a aussi créé un profil Facebook pour essayer de donner plus d'informations en temps réel aux membres. L'une des forces du réseau, de Interréseau au Burkina, c'est qu'on capitalise beaucoup les expériences et on les diffuse. Donc, les bonnes pratiques sont diffusées et les moins bonnes, les échecs, servent souvent de support d'information aux membres. Et une des choses, c'est que le réseau diffuse gratuitement ses publications de capitalisation aux membres, pour les membres du Sud, et c'est payant pour ceux au Nord. Donc, est-ce que l'agriculture de conservation et le travail de réseau, à mon avis, le plaidoyer pour l'expansion de l'agriculture de conservation doit exploiter les opportunités qu'offre le travail en réseau. C'est-à-dire, on doit essayer de rendre accessibles les informations, surtout dans les langues, les supports et les formats et supports aux agriculteurs. Merci de votre attention.
Advance. Now, I was going to ask a question to our two panelists. The first question is, in terms of collaboration, in my view, there are two levels. there is macro level collaboration, if I can categorize it as such. So, for instance, we have these big organizations on the continent that are called upon to collaborate. ACT, CARDESA, Acaa, and so forth. There is collaboration that is required at that level, isn't it? But also, nationally, which is where we actually need to see things happening, we need collaboration. Now, these two levels at some point have to meet, which means we have three components. We have collaborations that have to take place at a strategic regional organizational level among institutions that promote CA or that support CA. That's one level. We have national level where a certain forum or framework has to be put together, and we have a link between the two. Aminata's presentation presented to us quite a number of efforts that are done on the national level. And in your presentation, you are giving us a general framework of how some collaborations and partnerships can and should work. So I would like you, Janet, to give us a concrete suggestion of the kind of collaboration that we should see after this Congress between the various partner organizations within the region, within the African region, and also those who support us from outside the region, keeping in mind the fact that these organizations have been there, working in silos. First of all, why haven't they collaborated? I hope I'm talking to someone here, isn't it? We have very many organizations doing research, promoting seed production, doing X, Y, Z. Why haven't they been able to collaborate? And how can they collaborate? What steps should they take from this Congress tomorrow? How can they start talking with each other, and who should take the lead?
Push on the base.
Thank you, Gilbert, for that. I think there is some collaboration already taking place through the regional task forces at the regional level on CA and the national task forces. But what happens in these task forces is what most people do not know. And do these task forces reach out to the farmers? Do the farmers know that there are national task forces in their countries existing on CA? And if these task forces exist, what are they doing? Are they up at the upper level of the policy, or are they trickling down? So that's where I think we need to take a step further, because already there are platforms in place that exist. What do we add on these platforms to make sure that the knowledge generated at this level trickles down to the relevant people who need to? How do we close the knowledge gaps between these different task forces that are already existing? And if they exist, how do other people tap into what's going on in the task forces?
Yes, thank you very much. The same question goes to Minata. Yes, in French, if you wish. Vous avez entendu ma question? Non? Bon, la question est très simple. C'est comment est-ce qu'on devrait effectuer ou établir ces collaborations entre les différentes organisations qui font la promotion de l'agriculture de conservation au niveau régional et aussi au niveau national.
Je pense qu'au niveau national, c'est ce que j'ai essayé d'expliquer avec ce qu'on fait à Interréseau. Donc, au niveau d'Interréseau, dans les groupes thématiques de travail, ça dit qu'il y a des thèmes précis, comme j'avais parlé du financement de l'agriculture. Ça peut être sur l'agriculture de conservation. Il y a le ministère, un représentant du ministère de l'agriculture qui participe, il y a le secteur privé, il y a les banques, et on fait des échanges. Je pense qu'au niveau régional, il y a quand même les organisations paysannes qui existent. Il y a les organisations d'intégration sous-régionale. Quand je prends l'Afrique de l'Ouest, il y a l'UEMOA. l'Europa, la CEDEAO. Ils ont créé des task force, c'est-à-dire des groupes de pression, de plaidoyer sur les thématiques précises. Je pense que ces groupes peuvent mener le plaidoyer au niveau régional pour la prise en compte de l'agriculture de conservation dans les différentes politiques qui doivent être mises en place ou bien qui sont en train d'être élaborées.
Thank you very